You're listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.
Well, welcome to the Mammal Watching podcast with me, John Hall, in New York City.
And me, Charles Foley, in Minneapolis. How are you, John?
I'm okay, Charles. I'm okay. Been following bits and pieces of mammal news on the website and on social media over the past couple of weeks. First off is another interesting small carnivore sighting. Small carnivores seem to be a favorite for mammal watchers to pick up on, these rarities. And this time it's from Janis Ola, who I actually talked about last episode because of his great trip looking for European mink in Romania. He runs a Sacator, originally a birding company, but he's going through his old pictures from yesteryear to pass the time during COVID, and he sends me a picture from 2010 of this strange-looking weasel up a mountain in Sumatra. He goes, "Oh, John, do you know what this is?" And I'm like, "Holy crap, Janos, I think I do, but let me check." And yet, lo and behold, it is an Indonesian mountain weasel. It's almost unknown to science. There's maybe 3 or 4 pictures of it, as far as I can tell, and this is by far the best one. It's a really good picture. He got a fleeting look at it. So the IUCN Small Carnivore Group are very interested, and they're actually the first kind of group to formally induct mammal watching into their membership. So I've been corresponding with them for a while, and I'm actually a part of that group now, solely because I can channel them information about things like Amazon weasels and Busag's mongoose, and now Indonesian mountain weasel and other super cool stuff that mammal watchers are seeing that are still largely unknown to science. So that's all very exciting. The second thing was your discussion last time about rewilding Europe and bringing back the bison has triggered a lively debate in various places about what actually constitutes a wild species. And I think there's interesting on Facebook, especially there was an amusing debate with Martin Royal and others weighing in on this. And I think one of the key lessons is some people have got way too much time on their hands. I thought I was bad for the sort of lengths people go to and the amount of thought they put into this about how many bananas does it have to eat before it becomes wild is, no, I'm joking, but I do think about this stuff all the time. It's fascinating, but people really care, and it's really interesting, and it's important for conservation. As conservation efforts move forward and more species are isolated in tiny fragments, islands, or almost cages, if you like, of forest amongst a landscape that's been cleared. How wild is wild and what does it mean? So I think this is really good stuff, and really interesting to watch the different ways people think about this and how much they think about it. And what about you? What have you been up to, Charles?
Well, I had received a message from Jason Johnson, who lives in Salt Lake City. And he's an avid mammal watching podcast listener. And he also happens to be Lara's uncle. And he wrote a message saying that it would be interesting to hear more stories about some sort of the dangerous animals and dangerous mammal experiences in Africa. And I sort of started thinking about it the last few days. And what's interesting about scientists telling stories about some of the dangerous encounters in the wild is that often they're a bit reluctant to do it because 95% of the time, it's simply because they were doing something really silly, right? It wasn't the animal's fault. It was them, wrong place, wrong time, wrong activity, whatever. Not always. So I have to admit, I really want to get Rob Foster on the podcast to tell about his stories of being attacked by bears up in Canada. And those are crazy stories that he tells. But for the most part, it is human error. And I decided that I would tell one of my stories about a run-in that I had with a dangerous animal. So this happened back in 1994, and it was in my elephant research camp in Tarangire National Park in northern Tanzania. And this camp, it was just myself and my 2 staff and 3 or 4 tents in the middle of the park. There was no fence around it. And it was sort of early days when I really didn't have a good idea of what I was doing. And so I was sitting in my tent at night, and I heard a strange noise that I hadn't heard before. It was a sound. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Let me go and investigate what it is. So I grabbed a torch and I stepped outside of the tent, and I could hear elephants around on sort of the edge of camp. So I figured, okay, there's elephants around. I should be fairly safe. So I walked to the one edge of camp where it drops off into a dry river. And with a torch, I could see what was making the noise. And it was a pair of black-backed jackals. And they were sort of looking in my general direction and every so often giving one of these yaps. And then they looked towards me, went, "Wah, wah, 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 wah," and turned and fled. And I thought, oh, shit, this isn't good. So I wheeled around, and in the torchlight, I saw a big cat bearing down on me at full speed from about 20 yards away. And I thought, well, it's a lion and I'm dead. And I started to run, and I could just feel the claws in my back, and I was just waiting for the impact. And I tried to scream so I could alert the guys so that maybe they could then bring the car over before, the lion did too much damage to me. But I couldn't make any noise at all. So I sprinted back towards my tent. I dived over the table and landed in a heap inside the tent and lay there. It's like heart pounding. And eventually, when I pulled myself together, I shone the torch out, and right where I had been standing, there was a big male leopard. Wow. And I figured afterwards what had happened was that this leopard had been doing the rounds of camp, and the jackals had seen it. And then the leopard saw me from behind and thought I was some weird type of baboon or something, and attacked. And when I swung around and it saw the torch shining, then it hit the brakes. And in fact, I went back the next day and found there were deep skid marks in the sand. And the thing is that a leopard running full speed can cover 20 yards in 1 or 2 tenths of a second. Right. And that's how close I was to basically having this thing hit me from behind. And leopards tend to disembowel people, so that really would not have been much fun. But it taught me a good lesson, which is that if I was going to live out in that environment, I had to learn what the animals were saying, because there is a whole bush network of animals communicating the presence of predators. You've got things like the black-backed jackals, you've got birds, you've got fur-footed monkeys, you've got baboons. And it was really a case of me learning to interpret the signals, because that benefited me and prevented me from walking into predators. And what's interesting is that our guest today, Wendy Panaino, she talks about doing research walking at night through the Kalahari, following the pangolins, which is far more dangerous than anything I've done. And she just mentioned that she would just keep her wits about her. And I think that what she means is that you have to understand your surroundings, and you have to be able to read those signs of what the other animals are telling you.
Yeah. Well, that's extraordinary. Still, my heart was in my mouth when you were telling that. That squeaky bum time. A sort of similar vein. I remember when I was living in Zambia, I'd talking to some South African hunters or Zimbabwean hunters out there, trophy hunters, and they had a story a little bit about the language of other animals, and they'd shot a leopard in the evening, I think, and they'd left it to go and collect it the next day. They went back in the morning to get it, and the baboons had woken up and had seen it, and were all like super alarmed at this. There was this leopard down on the rocks, and as they walked towards the leopard to retrieve it, they were telling me the baboons were just going completely crazy, trying to warn them, just screaming at them and sort of just jumping up and down and putting on all sorts of a performance to let them know. So maybe that's a similar example of animals looking out for each other.
Yeah, and you can also see it in India. If you're ever sitting in a place like Bandhavgarh or Kanha, and a tiger is walking through the woods, you hear the deer barking, and also the the langurs. So again, similar sort of thing.
Yeah. No, exactly. Very cool. So if you ask any mammal watcher what their favorite 10 mammals are, or their 10 most wanted mammals, I'd say it's almost guaranteed that before too long, they're going to talk about Temminck's ground pangolin, or the African Cape pangolin, or it has many names, but that pangolin that is known by every mammal watcher, but almost never seen. And today's guest, Wendy Panaino, knows more about that species probably than anyone on the planet knows or has ever known. Wendy's been spending the last few years pursuing her postgraduate studies at the University of Witwatersrand. I'm sure I pronounced that terribly. And she's working in the place called the Swallow Kalahari Reserve, which is also famous among mammal watchers because it is the place, probably the only place where you can go and actually have a chance to see a pangolin. She's working on a PhD in wildlife and conservation and physiology. She also holds a BSc in biological sciences and another one in ecology, environment and conservation, both from the University of Witwatersrand. Wendy's dedicated her research to wildlife conservation in the field at Swallow, while also working as a project manager on the Kalahari Endangered Ecosystem Project. And that project aims to understand the responses of multiple Kalahari organisms, including mammals, birds, and reptiles, to climate change. So an absolutely fascinating study and study site. Welcome, Wendy. It's great to see you here.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for coming on the program, Wendy.
So, Wendy, could you perhaps start by telling us why you decided to become a wildlife biologist and a bit more about yourself generally?
Yeah, sure. I've never been someone that really ever knew what I wanted to do. I knew a lot about what I didn't want to do, so I could, by the process of elimination, just start ticking off those things. I knew I didn't want to be in an office. I knew I didn't particularly want to work with people, and wildlife always attracted me. I was really always an outdoorsy person, and my parents always encouraged me to be outdoors and tolerated all of my insect collecting and taking home things in lunch boxes, and mom wanting to throw it out and screeching and stuff. So I knew that outdoors was what I wanted to do. And then when I started looking at universities, this BSc program showed up and the subjects were quite intriguing. And so I thought I'd take it from there, and loved the subject, and then finally got to start picking majors, which was then zoology and a physiology combo. And then it just progressed. I didn't even know this whole world of research existed. I was so ignorant towards it. And then I think it was in third year that I got the opportunity to start doing some research, and I fell in love with it. And I thought, yep, this is the one. This is what I'll be doing. As for pangolins, that was totally random. That was just a project that was on offer. I hadn't really heard much about pangolins before this. And then when they said it was at Swallow, I had never heard of Swallow. And I thought, sheesh. But when I Googled it, I was like, really? Is this the place? Can't possibly be. There's no way. And then, yeah, I blinked and now I'm here.
And Swallow is, do you want to explain a little bit about where it is? Because it's fairly remote, isn't it?
Exactly. So Swallow is a conservation area. It's a privately owned reserve in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. So that's the northwestern parts of South Africa. And it's one of the most arid parts of the country, which is great for our climate change research. But yeah, very remote. I think our closest town is probably an hour and a half, 2 hours away. So yeah, very remote place, special place.
Right. And it's run as is the whole area run as a tourism operation, or is it just part of it, or what? How does it work?
Yeah, so it was obtained to be a conservation area, and I guess having tourists and stuff was just a bonus to that, because you, of course, want to show this place off to people. So, yeah, the entire reserve is accessible to guests.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned that you got offered the job of researching pangolins at Swallow, but how did that actually come about?
Yeah, so our research group was previously doing work on aardvark, and they were pretty much ecologically identical to pangolins. And so they did that for a couple of years. And then the question became, what about other insect-eating animals? How are they responding to the similar environment? And then pangolins, Swallow had said, well, we can find you some pangolins. We see them. Come on and tag them. And so the project was there. And I just got offered the project after I did my undergrad.
It's funny that you mentioned pangolins and aardvarks in the same sentence, because I got the mammal watching disease when I moved to Zambia when I was in my early 20s, and I had a year there, and I just became so fascinated by mammals. But everywhere I went, I wanted to see an aardvark and a pangolin. And it was this this journey, it was a road to madness. I went crazy, and I went back to South Africa 20 years later and drove about 4,000 kilometers in 5 days, just bouncing from place to place and not seeing either. And it was actually the aardvark that Charles put me onto, Marrick Game Reserve in South Africa, where I saw my first aardvark. But the pangolin remains elusive. So they do go together. They're two very special things.
Yeah, really. And among the guys in East Africa, obviously they spend so much time out in the field. They've seen the vast majority of the animals over there, but those are the two, aardvark. And aardvark, they don't see them because they are nocturnal and pretty shy. But pangolins, boy, very, very few people have ever seen a pangolin. And I always thought, one day I will stumble across one. No, after 25, 28 years or so, it still hasn't happened. So very difficult
animals to see. You hear that a lot by field guides and safari guides all the time. You know, they'd be working in the bush 20, 22 years and never seen a pangolin. So
why is it that they are so difficult to see?
Yeah, well, firstly, they do occur at low population densities, so your chances of encountering them are going to be slim in any case. But unlike an aardvark, they're quite small, and their first defense is just to lay low. An aardvark will probably run, which gives you a chance of seeing it crossing a road or running off into the bushes. And an aardvark is quite big. It looks like a termite mound, really. You can see it shaped from a mile away, whereas a pangolin, if it's in the grass, it's very low to the ground. You're probably not going to see it, and its eyes are not going to shine for you like a predator might or an antelope might. And well, it might shine, but the eyes are so tiny that you're not going to see that shine. And so, and if you're walking on foot for whatever reason, if they hear you coming, again, they lay low or they hide in a bush, and you're not going to even hear them because their sound is quite distinctive. They don't vocalize, but their scales make noises against vegetation and stuff. So when you hear it, you know what it is and you get excited. But if they hear you first, they're going to go undetected. I've had pangolins that were tagged that I knew were in that bush. I turned around for a second, looked back, and it was gone, and just never found it again. It's a bit embarrassing after 5 years of doing this. Blink and the pangolin's gone. But yeah, they're tricky ones to find because of those reasons. Yeah. There's a reason they've lasted this long, 80 million years.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I also get the impression that they don't follow paths. Is that correct? Because the reason I say that is because when we were camera trapping in forested areas in Mahali, we got lots of giant pangolins because they seem to walk along paths, whereas the ground pangolins certainly in East Africa don't seem to do that.
Yeah, I don't know what that's about. They are strange little animals. They seem to just do whatever they want, and there's nothing that you could say about a pangolin that is predictable in some ways. And certainly that movement, they're navigating based on scent, and you can watch them walk from tree to tree in a zigzag or in circles or whatever, but game paths don't interest them. They're not bothered about vegetation being in their way. That beautiful scale covering is just going to move it out the way. As for why the giant ground pangolin might do that, I'm not sure. But yeah, the way we find these Timmins pangolins out in this environment is seeing tracks crossing the road, never going along the road, always across, very distinctive, and you see that, jump out the car and follow those tracks.
Wow, fascinating. I'm taking notes here. I'm somewhere with some sand. So you're working on the Temminck's ground pangolin, but there are I think there's 8 species altogether of pangolins, I think. Can you tell us a bit more about the others and what their status is?
Yeah, so there's 8 in the world, like you said. There's 4 in Asia and 4 in Africa. I think all of the 4 in Asia are critically endangered. There might be one that's not listed as critically endangered yet, but I think it's probably just because the assessment is quite old. They are quite tricky to assess in the wild. And then the ones in Africa, there's, I think the 2 are, I think they might all 4 be vulnerable or one step above that, but certainly this Temminck's pangolin is only vulnerable for now. But as that demand in Asia for the illegal wildlife trade is skyrocketing and they're running out of pangolins here, the trade moves to Africa. And so, yeah, I think reassessments are going to be quite alarming if they do them.
Yeah, I bet.
And so you've mentioned a little bit about going out and finding tracks, etc. But how do you actually follow and find these animals when you're out there? So what does your actual day look like as a pangolin researcher?
It's very exciting. The part that everyone gets to see through the photos and stuff is that tracking process. So if one wanted to go and find a new pangolin for whatever reason to tag, you'd have to go out early morning. So the first thing is you want to get out there before anyone else has driven over those tracks so that you know that they are fresh and not lying underneath tracks from last night or something. And like I said, they cross straight across the road, very distinctive. And then sunlight is also super valuable when the tracks are so small and in the sandy environment can fade quite quickly, just a little breeze and tracks disappear. So the earlier you get out, the fresher they'll be. And with the sun rising, you get a nice glare and shadow cast over the track, so it's quite easy to see. And then you would follow those tracks, hopefully, if it's bare enough ground, until you find a burrow. You might see some fresh diggings along the way, scratchings where they were feeding. I think a typical misconception is that people think that pangolins drag their tails when they're walking, and so it seems to be as easy as tracking that tail dragging, but that's not the case. They walk on two little hind feet. So if you imagine a tortoise track, just one half of its body. So instead of the 4 tracks, you've just got the 2 going into one line. Find a burrow and then sit there that night. And they can come out anytime they like. So you could be sitting there for 20 minutes. You could be sitting there for 8 hours. You just patiently wait. And they're super sensitive as well. So if you get too close to the burrow, if they smell you or hear you or whatever the case, they're going to delay that emergence. So you'll be really careful about it. Sit downwind and be quiet. And then when they come out the burrow, it's the most glorious feeling, of course, because that is success. And you weren't crazy that you thought you saw tracks going into that burrow. Of course, if they're using the same burrow multiple times, you've got tracks coming in and out. And so it's hard to tell whether that animal is in there in the first place. And then it comes out and then we tag them. And then that's a VHF tracking transmitter, and that allows us to live track. So it doesn't store any data on the tag. Just allows me to go out and find where that individual is. And it's super accurate. It's super great. The antenna is directional. So you just follow a beat. But of course, if it's a new animal, you don't know where it spends most of its time. So you kind of just have to go to the last place you found it and hope you get a signal, which most days you don't, to be honest. And then you've got every direction around you to move in to try and find this animal. And you just got to, go in all directions until you get a beat eventually.
And can you pick up the signal from above ground? If they're below ground, how close do you need to be to them to actually get the signal?
Yeah, so you can get a signal if they're underground. With the satellite tag, it's a little more tricky because that's a reading from satellites, whereas these are just radio waves talking to each other, to a base unit that I have in my hand and the tag that's on the animal. So even if it's underground, you still get a nice sound, but I think our range is probably about 1.5 to 2 kilometers on average. But my record is 6 kilometers. To be fair, I was on a very high dune and the animal was in a burrow on a very high dune, burrow facing me. So there was direct line of sight. It was crystal clear. And the higher you get, the better your chances. So that's extreme, 6 kilometers. But wow. On average, it's probably about a 2 kilometer range. Yeah.
So then let's say the animal emerges and then you just follow along behind them. How far behind them are you?
Depends on the animal. So they've all got their own little personalities. They don't all habituate to me or desensitize to me that easily. Some of them take a couple of days. Some of them take several months. So if it's a super relaxed individual, you could probably get to within 4 or 5 meters and watch what they're doing. And they might come sniff your shoes or whatever if they're intrigued or whatever. But others, you might have to stand 20 meters away. And of course, they are sensitive to flashlights. And so if it's a new individual, you have to, again, desensitize them to that light. And so slowly introducing them to light. But once they get used to it, then it's brilliant. Then you can walk with them, alongside them while they're feeding, and they're not bothered. As long as you're not blocking their scent, I suppose. So always staying downwind because that's what they're using to navigate. So stay out of the way and they'll do what they want to do. It's pretty amazing, actually.
And so you are predominantly nocturnal then. You basically adapt yourself to the pangolins and you are mostly going out at night. Is that right?
Exactly. You have to. It's great in the wintertime because that's when they tend to become more diurnal. And so you've got normal structure to your day. You've got normal dinner time. Everything's great. This winter, however, was very different. The whole idea of rainfall resulting in food productivity and lots of food available. They didn't feel the need to come out during the day this winter. And we always thought there might be a temperature constraint, but if this winter taught us anything, it's that they don't care what the temperatures are. It's all about energy balance. If they have enough food, they will withstand cold temperatures. So Kalahari can get down to maybe -8 degrees Celsius. Maybe doesn't sound much to someone who lives in, I don't know, Canada or Colorado or something that probably gets much lower than that. But for someone like me that's used to 40 plus temperatures in the summer, sitting outside a burrow at -5 degrees in the middle of winter, which is not what I've signed up for at all. And you start questioning a lot of things. It was definitely a new challenge for me. I was shocked to the core, and yeah, had to really push through on that one for sure. Normally it's great. You're walking at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with this animal. You don't need a flashlight, you don't need much. But this year, yeah, it was questionable.
And so if you're walking on foot, I mean, I know that there are at least some lions in that area. And I don't know if they're leopards as well. How do you avoid getting eaten?
So we're quite lucky at Swalu because the reserve is divided into two by a public road and fences, and the lions hang out on the other side. And we haven't initiated any pangolin work on the lion side for that exact reason, to avoid getting eaten. But there's several other things. There's buffaloes, there's leopards, there's cheetahs, there's wild dogs, hyenas, everything. But they're not a particular threat in this area. So, and also, if you're just paying attention to your surroundings, it's very quiet when you're alone out there. It's just you and a pangolin. Hearing myself breathe or talking to a pangolin and a pangolin scuffling around. So you can easily hear what's going on around you and make sure nothing's happening.
All right. Wow. That is so cool.
Yeah, isn't it? So we'll put a link in this in the notes, but there's a wonderful film called The Eye of the Pangolin that looks at the 4 species in Africa. I think it's on YouTube, that a guy called Bruce Young made. And I first sort of met or saw Wendy in that film. There's a scene of her with Bruce looking at pangolins in the Kalahari, I guess in Swalu, and it's really lovely. It's my favorite bit of the film. And I actually met Bruce in person for the first time a couple of days ago, and he told the story about you out at night slightly differently, I have to say. He made it sound like it's really very dangerous, and a lot of the other people at Swalu think you're a bit of a legend, or perhaps completely crazy for spending so much time out, even if the lions do hang out on the other side of the road.
That's so funny. A lot of our guides do tell their guests that because the guest will walk up to me to come and view a pangolin, and the guide is handling a rifle, and they see me with my little headlamp and nothing else. And they do think I'm a little bit loopy, but once you spend enough time in this place, you realize nothing is really a threat. You know, there's the occasional snake running around, but yeah, just pay attention to your surroundings. Oh, Bruce. Good fun.
Yeah, it's something we had a George Schaller on a few weeks ago, the great field biologist, and he was fascinating, talking about the fact all the work he'd done with tigers and lions. He never carried a gun, and it was really, he just said, you just treat them with respect, essentially, and they'll treat you the same way. So I think it's a lovely philosophy, even if it's slightly dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. You just give animals their space. Doesn't matter how big or how small.
Yeah.
And they'll respect you the way you respect them, of course.
Yeah. Well, you've spent all this time out in the bush working with these fascinating animals. What are some of the things you've discovered about their ecology?
Tons. There's been tons of stuff, and I find it very hard to summarize it all into one little package. And I was just busy working on a paper now, and so just realizing how much there is, which is so great. It's been amazing working on an animal that so little is known, and so pretty much everything that you learn is going to be new, or at least contribute to our understanding of the animals. At the same time, it's a bit tricky because you have nothing to base it on. And so if you find something bizarre, you're like, what do I compare this to? You know, because they are so bizarre. But starting on the ecology side, they are very fussy eaters. We very quickly learned they won't just eat any prey species. So they eat strictly ants and termites, but not just any ants and termites. They are very picky about which species they want to eat. And so there's a very cool ant called the cocktail ant, which is their favorite, that hangs out at the bases of trees, which is why they navigate from tree to tree in search of that prey. And then another one called the pugnacious ant, which is quite an aggressive species, but jam-packed with energy. They love that as well. That hangs out at the bases of trees, and then the bases of grasses, and then a termite species as well at the bases of grasses. We also learned that they shift their diet in winter. So we did a whole bunch of insect surveys each month to see what was available to pangolins each month. And we found that, again, they're not going for the most abundant species, which is also remarkable. So they really have a particular taste for very particular species. And in wintertime, which is generally a stressful time for most animals because your food resources decline during that time. So we expected them to shift their diet, maybe target different prey species or whatever, and they didn't. But they did increase their termite intake. We can't understand the reason for that. We're not sure if there's maybe metabolic changes that happen during that time. We have no idea. We also learned that they shifted their behavior during winter. So most of the time they were nocturnal. We've just been speaking about me running around at night. But in winter, it was great because they did come out during the day. And we learned that that was directly related to their body temperature. So we implanted very tiny body temperature data loggers into the pangolins, and that was logging body temperature every 5 minutes. And we found that during winter, when they were energy stressed because they couldn't find enough food or get the right food, body temperature started to decline during the day. And because of that, they had to come out early. So they have to come out during the day to avoid those cold temperatures because they don't have the energy to shiver or keep warm, whatever they need to. And so that's again why this year was so special, is because it kind of proved the opposite true as well, is that when food is available, body temperature should be stable, which means they don't have to come out during the day, which they didn't do this year. So they were still nocturnal throughout the winter here. So in terms of the bigger picture things, the climate change things, we know that climate change or increased heat and aridity in these areas is impacting insect populations. And the concern is that if insect populations continue to decline, we're just going to continue to see these indirect effects of climate change on pangolins themselves. So not only is it going to be a direct impact in terms of increased temperature on their body temperature regulation, but also through their food resources. So no insects, poor body temperature regulation, you get these crazy fluctuations in body temperature, and that can't be healthy. We're seeing fluctuations up to 8 degrees Celsius, which if that was you or me, we'd be sitting in hospital. Probably we'd be dead. If it was just 1 degree fluctuation, we'd be in hospital, but 8 degrees, we'd be dead. So they have these remarkable abilities to tolerate those fluctuations. We just don't know to what extent. So during my study, we didn't have a particularly dry or drought period. And so I suspect during a drought period, they might not be able to tolerate those fluctuations. We might see some mortalities, but if that becomes more frequent with climate change, it's going to be problematic. So I think we're going to start seeing massive contractions in their range across Africa.
Oh dear. That's awful.
And so how many individuals do you actually have collared? I mean, how many are you tracking at any one time? At
any one time, probably not more than 4 or 5. So it's tricky. For the PhD, I had a total of 6, which is not ideal in statistical and scientific terms. But for a pangolin, I think it's pretty great. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I had 6, but they came and went. You know, sometimes they lose the tracking transmitter, or they walk way out of range and you lose them. So at any given time, I'd probably say it's about 3 or 4. But in total, over time, we've probably tagged about 27. Which is quite nice, I think. Some of them we've taken the tags off because we've been done with them. No need to work with them. They're wild and free again, which is also very cool.
Right. Yeah. And would one pangolin sometimes lead you to another pangolin? How much social interaction is there between pangolins?
Not much. So for 4 years, I had never seen 2 pangolins come together, which is a long time, spending every day with pangolins and not seeing that. But I had seen them tracking tracks, so sniffing out tracks where I can see the track and they're following the track with their nose. So at some point, I'm sure they would have come across another pangolin. But I also didn't have those 6 pangolins that I was working with weren't really close to each other at all. So the chances of them overlapping in any case would have been rare. Until this past year, we've got a male and 3 females using the same area, which is remarkable. And we saw them interact. Well, we know they were interacting because they were using the same burrow. It was a mother and her pup. They're called pups when they're babies. And the father went to visit, which is very rare. So that doesn't happen very often. So the three of them were sharing a burrow together, which is pretty amazing. And then I've seen two males come together once, and it kind of looked like a dominance display. We have no idea if they have any territoriality at all, but that kind of looked like they might. But other than that, the interactions are very, very rare.
And what sort of home range sizes do they have?
It's probably a radius of about 4 or 5 kilometers. So for something that's that small and wanders around on 2 legs, it's quite big.
Yeah.
It's quite big. But occasionally we get a male, like this male that we have now, that's overlapping with 3 females home ranges. He seems to be, I don't know if you can call it a rover, because he doesn't tend to stick to the normal home range size of what we know for males. He seems to patrol a much bigger area, and I wonder if it is because of these 3 females being in that area, because he frequents the areas a lot. So and he changes burrows every second night, which is also a little bit unusual for pangolins. They usually change maybe 3 or 4 nights, unless it's a pregnant or a female or one that has a baby, then it's maybe every 7 to 10 days. But this particular male changes every second night, and so he's hard to keep up with, and he just goes. I haven't calculated his home range yet, but it's probably twice the size of a normal pangolin.
Wow. And do they dig their own burrows or use other like aardvark holes and things?
Yeah, they can dig their own burrows. They're not very good at it. And I wouldn't recommend it to a pangolin, having seen them dig their own burrows. It's very sad looking little burrows. But yeah, mostly they'll use aardvark or porcupine burrows or warthog burrows, whatever they can find. If it's a youngster, maybe even a spring hare burrow or something.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Swallow sounds like a fantastic place. What other interesting mammal species will you be coming across as you go about your research on pangolins?
Oh, there's tons of things. There's all kinds of antelope. There's some amazing arid adapted antelopes like the gemsbok or the, what do we call it in English, the oryx. Amazing things. There's giraffes, zebras, there's buffaloes, there's all kinds of cats, like we spoke about the lions, there's cheetahs, leopards, there's hyenas, both spotted hyenas and brown hyenas. Then there's the small things, all kinds of small mammals like rodents, elephant shrews, spring hares, wildcats, jennets. Where do I stop? There's so much stuff. And the bird life, oh my goodness, the bird life. Because I think this is typically thought of as an arid zone, which, okay, it is, well, semi-arid. And so seems like a place that shouldn't be too diverse or productive, but it is. I think Swallow alone has, if not the highest antlion or lacewing diversity in the country. And in fact, we've got, in terms of our butterflies, we've got 77 butterfly species, which is more than the entire United Kingdom has. And that's just Swallow alone. So I think that's pretty remarkable.
Wow, that is. And what about some of the other termite-eating species? You've got a little thing called the aardwolf, which is a small member of the hyaenid family. Do you get those over there as well?
Yes. And this year, actually, we've seen more than we have ever in my time here. And I'm not sure why, but yeah, they're pretty cool, very specialized on termites. Then we get little things called bat-head foxes, very, very cute little things. They're of particular interest to us because aardvarks are super specialized, pangolins are super specialized. They're burrowing, they're nocturnal. Bat-head foxes are burrowing, they're nocturnal, they're eating insects, but they're much more generalist. They seem to just eat whatever they can find. They'll eat berries and leaves, and someone sent a video recently of them with a snake in the mouth. So, yeah, in terms of the way they go about life, it seems very similar to a pangolin in an aardvark, but they seem to just be able to deal with conditions much better and can eat a much wider diversity of food. But certainly insects is the main prey items there.
Right.
And do you have any idea of why swallow is so good for pangolins that are so hard to see elsewhere?
Yeah, I think it's probably comes down to a lot of bias. So first of all, we are able to do night drives out here. So being out when these animals are active, you have a higher chance of seeing them. We've got the research going, and so we have several individuals that are tagged, and so it has been easy for people to find and see pangolins for a long time. We have the right substrates. The sand is very soft, and so when you do see tracks going across the road, you are able to track it. unlike the eastern side of the country, they've got very hard and clay soils. So it's very tricky to see tracks in the first place. So whether it is BIOS or not, I have no idea, but it's a great place to be.
That sounds it.
Yeah, really. And you've been studying pangolins, what, for 4 or 5 years now?
6 years now, yeah.
Oh, 6 years now. 6 years, wow. And have you ever been able to go to some of the other parts of Africa or Asia and see some of the other pangolin species?
I haven't. I will. I'm dying to. I'm so desperate to see a little black-bellied tree pangolin. So desperate. And old Rod Cassidy from Sanger Lodge has told me I must come visit to see them, and I'm dying to. And I've always said, let me finish the PhD. Let me finish the PhD. And now it's officially done. Oh. And I need to just go. I need to just go.
Congratulations on finishing the PhD.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a long road.
Yeah. Well, clearly you need a break, and clearly you need to go looking for other pangolins. It's
I do. I really, really do.
So, are there any other mammals that you would really like to see in the wild?
All of them. I want to be out and seeing all kinds of cool things all the time. I'm a real naturalist at heart. So whether it's a mammal or a bird or a reptile or geology, I couldn't care less. I want to explore and see cool things.
Welcome to my world, or our world. Yeah. You're on the right podcast, that's for sure.
Yes, indeed. And just taking you back to the mammals that you see over there, do you get black-footed cat in your area?
Ooh, yes. I happen to be the first person to get proof of a black-footed cat on the property. There had been reports in the past where people might have seen it, but people often confuse them with African wildcats or domestic cats if they happen to be on neighboring properties for whatever reason. And so there was all these rumors, but no actual proof until one day. I was actually following a pangolin one day, and I saw these little eyes and thought it was a wildcat kitten. So I approached it a little bit and put my phone on video mode and got this video. And black-footed cat stood up and hissed at me and then trotted off a little bit. And I was like, what is this? What am I looking at? I didn't know how important it was at the time. It was like midnight, and I'd sent it to a couple of people, and I got all the same response, like, do you even know what you just saw? And I was like, well, I think it's a black-footed cat. And but do you even know what that means? So that was a pretty special one. And I think it had been seen maybe twice after that. But yeah, don't see them often here.
Right. Wow, perhaps too much competition from other predators. Yeah.
And I'm surprised Charles hasn't mentioned this, because this is something that he's a little bit obsessed with. Striped weasel. Have you ever seen that?
Nope.
Nope. They ought to be there in principle, right? Yeah.
In principle, exactly. We can say that about a couple of things. It's pretty remarkable how there are a couple of things that we should see here, but just don't. And what the reason is, I have no idea.
Right. Well, given that you've got you're tripping over aardvarks and pangolins, then I'm not going to feel sorry for you.
No.
So,
no, you shouldn't.
And should any intrepid mammal watchers decide to head down to Swalu, what would you recommend be the best months for them to go there?
Any month is a good time. No matter what you want to see, just come on down and come and see it. Of course, if you're out for the nocturnal animals, most winters are great because they do become diurnal. I don't want to say that with certainty because this year again showed us flames and they're all nocturnal still, but yeah, winter seems to be a nice time because they do become diurnal. But hell, if you come down in winter and they are nocturnal, you just need a little bit of patience and you'll see them. You just got to put in the time.
And a warm jacket, yeah.
And a very warm jacket.
and
a hat and gloves and thermals.
Right, yes. And which months are winter down there?
Right.
Is it sort of
June, July,
August? Yeah, okay, right. Yeah. And so those are
even going into September, depending on the year, but yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Those are the core winter months, yeah.
Right, okay. Great to know.
Wendy, that was just fabulous. Thank you very, very much. It's what a life you live, and working with what animals we'd all love to see. I'm green with envy. But thank you very much for sparing the time. And we don't think we've said you're actually speaking from the reserve, so you've got amazing Wi-Fi for being out in the middle of nowhere. It's super impressive too. But thank you very much.
Very privileged. Yeah. Thank you, guys. This is always wonderful. Always wonderful to share stories and information and meet new people. So it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. I think people are going to be fascinated. They are just fascinating animals, and people are going to be really interested to hear what you have to say about them. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Good. I'm glad.
You're listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.